Hello.
This video was made in preparation for the 25p25 subscriber special.
Hey Vince Chutney, 25p here. I saw the Salmonella video about encyclopedias and Pliny the Elder. I thought, what if I do that, but with music production? And like Pliny the Elder, I'm only one person. I'm going off of Google and memory here. I was also taught music production for like a year. You don't care about that. So here we go.
Author's note, my voice is very monotone, so probably watch this video in 2x speed just to stop yourself from wanting to gouge your own eyes out. I will also link videos that explain the topics I speak about that go into depth about them. Got it? Sweet. I'm
splitting this video into 4 main sections: fundamentals, sound design, theory, mixing, with a few subsections thrown in there for good measure. Part 1. Fundamentals. This is some of the basic level stuff you could learn before creating music. If you're planning on creating and recording music, the first thing you're going to need is a DAW. This is how you record and put the series of noises you make into somewhere where it can be saved and re-listened to. There are many flavors of DAW you can choose from: Corporate Pistachio, SoundCloud Mango, or even Monster Energy Vape. This video by Stop Shut Games goes into details of each one if you want to learn and choose by your taste. The main two I've used are Logic Pro and FL Studio. If you don't want to pay, you can use the free alternatives. The 2 free alternatives I have used, and are fine for beginners, are BandLab and Soundtrap. Again, good for beginners. Once you get the hang of it, don't use them. I really recommend you buy them. Remember, piracy, big no-no. But if you were to pirate, I don't know how you pirate, okay? Don't ask me these silly questions. The one I will be covering in this video is FL Studio, but we're not there yet completely. Hello, I'm over here now. This video isn't really me teaching you, it's more just a collectivization of all my knowledge that I've built up over the years. Okay, songs. We all know them, we all listen to them, you want to make them. This is what a song is made up of: dynamics, rhythm,
pitch,
harmony, structure, melody, instrumentation, and texture. These are also known as the dimensions. This video by Ethan Davis covers what a song is made up of and goes over some of these elements. The first element is dynamics, a special word for loudness. The Italians have got some cool sounding words describing dynamics, like pianissimo for very quiet and fortissimo for very loud. The Italians have got such a way with words, like my favorite Italian sentence, "Ti faccio un culo così." Brilliant. Every song utilizes loudness to convey emotions, soft being very tense and uneasy, and loud being very powerful and establishing. The next element is rhythm. Rhythm is the groove and time of a song. Every song usually follows a tempo or BPM. High BPMs mean fast, small BPMs mean slow. The Italians, once again, I got some cool words like adagio and andante to describe different speeds. Boy, the Italians sure are cultured. Every song has a pulse that is counted in beats or crotchets if you want to go fancy with it, and we can subdivide these beats into smaller beats just so that it's not a constant tick, 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 tick over and over again. 8th notes, 16ths, so on. There are different ways of subdividing them. Made a video on subdivisions so you can learn them. Rhythm, or rhythmos, means it follows a pattern, because as humans, we all love a good pattern. Some of us love patterns so much, we've got a whole mental disorder over it. And if it doesn't follow a pattern, it's going to be very unpleasant to listen to. So bear that in mind whenever you're making drums, or a bass line, or a melody, or anything musical. To create this pattern, we put these beats into time signatures, which just tell you how many times you play something until it's repeated. You can have all kinds of time signatures, even, odd, in between, what have you. The most popular one is 4/4, used in pop, hip-hop, rock. The top number tells you that there are 4 main beats, and we can value them as 4 quarter notes. From before, made a video about different time signatures, which you can also check out. The 4 quarter notes are usually the beats of a song that are most emphasized, and anything that's not on those beats are usually less emphasized, but they give the groove of the song. Some genres go against the mainstream quarter note emphasizing and emphasize the off beats, or have them as a main part of the groove. This is called syncopation, when you focus on the offbeat. Genres like jazz and Latin and funk use syncopation to give their songs their rhythm. I also made an album about rhythms, which you can also check out. Here's some rhythms you can learn. You can incorporate them into your music. Tresillo. It sounds like this. You can hear it in a lot of UK drill, but it's in a lot of other songs of different genres. One of them being this bastard's creating his most famous song, and it's got this tresillo beat in it. I used to think that only UK drill used this pattern, but then I realized, oh shit, it's everywhere. So use it however you want in whatever genre you want. The next rhythm being reggaeton. It sounds like this. It's the same beat as tresillo, but you can use the kick and the snare in different places and maybe add a hi-hat, so it sounds interesting depending on what you do. I like it. It sounds very bouncy, so mess around with it. The next rhythm is 4 on the floor. It sounds like this. It's used in a lot of different genres. If you add a snare on the 2 and the 4 with hi-hats, then you've got a rock beat. If it's just the kick by itself, it's used in a lot of electronic music like jungle and drum and bass, so on. The next pattern is the amen break. It sounds like this. Pretty fun. I used to love the amen break, but please, for the love of Cherubby Clarkson, don't overuse the amen break or 4 on the floor. I did some sound engineering a few days ago where I was sound engineering for DJs, and it's fun listening to all of their songs. They opened me up to DJ music. I didn't really see the appeal, but being there in the crowd, hearing all of the fucking sub bass and stuff like that going on was really fun and energetic. But almost all of them just overused the amen break and the 4 on the floor, right? And all of the songs kind of just merged into one, and the night was kind of forgettable because all the songs just sounded very similar with each other. I mean, yeah, there was some ones that standed out because they used interesting samples, but most of them were just amen break, risers, tension, all building up, and then release with all these crazy synth noises and some pretty interesting samples. Again, no disrespect to the DJs I sound engineered to, right? Great fun, but come on, you gotta step this production up. Some honourable mentions. Triplets. The way you play a triplet can be turned into swing or a shuffle, and dotted 16ths is when you have a 16th note, but you chop up where you place the notes in the 16th note over a bar, so it sounds very syncopated. Now the next element is pitch. Every song uses pitch in different ways to convey different emotions. Long vibratos can be pretty suspenseful. There's different ways of articulating pitch to get cool sounds, like when you pitch bend on a guitar. There's a lot of science behind it, and you don't really need to know the science. But basically, you get a note from an instrument, be it piano, guitar, calliope, whatever. That note vibrates at a frequency, and the frequency is just a special word for vibration. That vibration is measured in hertz, which is the speed at which the vibration vibrates. So the higher the hertz, the higher the pitch, and vice versa. So a bunch of musical motherfuckers hundreds of years ago thought, what if we get a bunch of notes together and pitch them to a linear sequence of frequencies? And this is where we get the notes that we play in Western music today. This is also known as 12-tone equal temperament, because we split the notes into 12 tones. Very clever. A tone is 2 notes in distance, so C to D, for example. And a semitone is 1 note in distance, so C to C sharp. Some other people thought, why limit yourself to just 12 notes? This is where microtonal music comes in. And this is for the really underground, anti-mainstream motherfuckers. It's called microtonal because there's frequencies in the tones that we're not using. So if you want to be experimental with it and say, screw your 12 notes, I'm going to do as many notes as I fucking want. Look at you being so underground and going against the mainstream. I bet you think you were born in the wrong generation as well. To be fair though, there are some pretty good songs that use microtones, especially in gaming. This video by Cadence Hero talks about some of them. Apparently even Toby Fox uses microtones in his music, which is fucking insane, given the music he makes is just next level. So I guess there's a lesson in not hating something just because it's different in there somewhere. I don't know. Another musical term you might hear a lot is dissonance. Dissonance is a term used to describe pitches that don't work together. This can range from, oh, that's a bit weird, to, oh god, stop, ah! If you really want to listen to stuff with dissonance in it, you can listen to my music, which I have on my YouTube and SoundCloud. Almost every song has got a tiny bit in it because I suck fuck. This is a bad advertisement. My personal theory as to why some pitches sound bad together are because the mass and the frequencies don't work out. Like you see in those videos where people play around with the water vibrations and you see all the little ripples, and when they clash with each other and spread out all weirdly. I don't know if that's true or not though. I'm just a guy on the internet, I'm not a scientist. I'm also not Jacob Collier. You may think I am because of all the yap about pitch and frequency nobody cares about, but believe me, I'm not that guy. He's the Jamie Oliver of the music industry. And to prove I'm not him, here's another little fun fact about pitch. Pitch and rhythm are the same thing. This guy David Bennett Piano, he made a YouTube short about how they're the same thing, which you can watch. But basically, because pitch vibrates at a rhythm, that makes it a rhythm. And if you repeat a rhythm so many times really quickly, it becomes a pitch. So pitch, rhythm. The next element is harmony. Harmony, or polyphony, is when you get more than one note together. Not to be confused with monophony, which is only one sound that could be made. Some harmonies sound good, but others sound dissonant. Sometimes a harmony works on its own, but when transitioning to another harmony, it can sound dissonant. Some notable harmonies are octaves, fifths, major and minor thirds. You bring these harmonies together and you got a chord, which I talk more about at this timestamp. It takes a lot of practice to get the whole harmony thing down, but Google, you can use that, or you could just fuck about on a keyboard until you get something good. Some important words are flat and sharp, which just means flat, moved down a semitone, sharp, moved up a semitone. Flat can sound quite scary and weird, sharp can sound quite too much and scary and weird as well. The next element is structure, which just means you got one
Until I
bit,
get
and
rudely
then you got
awakened by the
another bit.
dustman.
This goes back to that pattern thing from rhythms, where everyone likes a good pattern. This video by Lander, I don't know, explains song structure, and this video by Colorful Keys explains forms. Quickfire forms. You got binary, AABB pattern, where you have two sections and switch between the two. Ternary, like binary, but goes A, B, A, and then A again. Rondo, where there's a theme that you repeat in the song. Thorough composed, where there's no repetition and it's just one long journey. And of course you got all the names for sections like chorus, verse, bridge, etc. 3 more elements to go. Melody is the part of the song that makes it unique and usually sits on top of everything. Everyone pays attention to the melody, everything else just helps the melody. From what I understand, a memorable melody follows these rules. It shouldn't be too rhythmically active, so don't go crazy with the subdivisions, and it's not jumping in pitch. It's good to keep the melody's notes as close to each other as you can. Sometimes repeating notes can help make it even more memorable as well. A good rule of follow... Fuck's sake. I'm having a stroke! A good rule of thumb you can follow is if it's easy to hum, then it's a memorable melody.
But wait, a melody by your definition is something that makes a song memorable. Then couldn't a melody be anything I find memorable about a song?
Yeah, I guess. People can go around call anything a melody. Oh, that's a groovy bass line. Oh, sorry, bass melody. Man, that drum melody is really funky. Who's your inspiration? Your baby's crying melody is super annoying. Can you tell it to stop it? Silliness. Come on. Period and sentence melody forms. I recently learnt these useful forms of writing melodies. Shout out Dave. Who's Dave? Don't worry about it. Most of my melodies stink, and I rarely make a melody that I'm happy with, you know. Even when my music is following the rules that I said you should follow, like, I still found it really hard writing those good melodies because, you know, the brains weren't fucking working during those specific moments. But now that I know this, it just became so much more easier. Period form is when the melody repeats one phrase at least twice and then ends on a cadence. A cadence is a direction in which a chord or a note resolves. More on cadences at this timestamp. Sentence melody form, when you have one phrase and then play a different phrase, finally ending it on a cadence. It's all really that easy, and knowing this just makes it so much easier writing melodies. Instrumentation. Whatever instruments you use, there's not really much else to go on. You know, you can use instruments that are cliche to a specific fucking genre, but really, with samples, you can make a song out of pitched farts and nobody would care, right? Use whatever instruments you want. If you're looking at it from a what my song needs perspective, you can watch that video by Ethan Davis. He covers all the basic stuff that a song includes. Finally, you got texture. Texture is having more than one sound, but the quality of the sounds are different. Like a violin and a piano, for example, they can play similar notes, but they sound different. When there's lots of texture, that usually means that there's lots of stuff going on with different instruments, but it works. Anyway, those are all the fundamentals. You can use them as a checklist if you want to see if your song has got everything to qualify as a song. Whether it's a hit song or not is an entirely different question that I don't have the answer to. Part 2. Theory. This was gonna happen eventually, might as well get it out of the way. I briefly covered some theory topics in very long, boring detail in the pitch and harmony sections of the fundamentals, but now I'm going to go even more into it.
Whee!
I know music theory is a pretty taboo subject among music producers. I'm not going to get into the whole do you need to know music theory argument. I understand it's confusing and complicated, but knowing this stuff really helps, in my opinion. And just so that it's not just me saying a bunch of shit, I'm going to also tell you how it's useful after I finish explaining them. Okay, so this is less music theory and more songwriting. Tension and release. Tension and release is a big part of music. Every song uses it in different ways. It basically means when a song gets all built up and ready to explode like a Mento in a Coke bottle, and release is when that tension that gets built up is finally released and everything goes back to normal. So if you think your music sounds boring, be it your chords or your melodies, probably learn a bit of theory. Okay, so you've got chords. I briefly went over harmonies, but chords are when you bring the harmonies together. There are 4 important chords that you should know. You got your majors, made up of root, which is the first note of the chord, that's got the most emphasis. Major third, second note of the chord, tells you the mood. And the fifth, which is the third note of the chord, and that emphasizes the first note, the root. If you own a piano or keyboard, you can just look at the keys. If you're just going off of a screen like me, you're going to have to do a lot of counting. There's also the stamp tool on FL if you want to use that, and the chord trigger. But you don't need to worry about them because you are better than those lazy. The next important chord you've got is minor. The minor chord is made up of root, minor third, and fifth. And for both major and minor chords, the fifth is 7 semitones away. And in case you don't remember what a semitone is, because my monotone voice sucked the life out of you, a semitone is one note in distance. So C to C sharp, that's a semitone. You can tell major and minor chords apart because major chords sound bright and happy and minor chords sound sad and dark. Theory purists out there are going to be all like, not all major chords sound happy, not all minor chords sound sad. And you'd be right in thinking, who cares? The next big chord you've got is the diminished chord, made up of root, minor third, and flat fifth. Once again, if you've forgotten what I said about flat and sharp, flat is when you move it down a semitone, sharp is move it up a semitone. So the fifth is flattened, sounds very weird because that's the one that makes the root sound nice. So if you're not making the root sound nice, the frequencies are all like, what's going on? Flat fifth is also known as a tritone or the devil's note, which according to this video is a load of shit fed to you by the lamestream media. Thanks, Biden. The next big chord, which isn't really big because nobody really knows about it or cares about it, is the augmented chord, which is root, major third, sharp 5, or another major third, depending on how you look at it. Both diminished and augmented chords sound weird, which are good if you want to create tension. See, I told you I'd bring this shit back. So if you want to make your shit sound interesting, throw a couple of diminished and augmented chords in there. You can go even further with chords and create stacked chords where you add notes to them. They're also known as add chords, stacked chords, who gives a fuck. You've got 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th, to name a few. This video by David Bennett Piano explains every chord, which you can watch if you want to learn all the different types of chords that exist. You can throw a couple of them in there and make your shit sound cool. The problem with using these add chords are, after you keep on adding the notes, they become a little less coherent and you can't really tell where they're going anymore because they're split among octaves. So you can bring some of the other notes down octaves so then it's more close and packed together. You can really tell what's going on. This is known as a chord inversion, when you bring a note up or down an octave. It can be used to create tension or just make shit sound a bit more clear. You can go in a different direction with chords and use suspended chords, or sus chords for short, which is when you move a minor third down a semitone. This is what's known as a suspended second, so a sus2 chord. And when you get a major third and move it up a semitone, that makes a sus4 chord. Okay. Important note, if you really don't want to know all these different types of chords, you can just experiment, because it will take forever explaining how each and every chord works together. You can just do it yourself, figure out which chords sound nice with each other by playing them, and if it doesn't sound nice, change the chord, or you can Google how that chord resolves. You've also got scales. There are 12 notes that you can play on the keyboard, but you can group specific notes together into a group. Well, that was redundant. These are called scales or keys. The major scale usually sounds pretty bright, and the minor scale sounds pretty sad, just like the chords. And then you've got the chromatic scale, which is all the notes on the keyboard. Fuck segregation. With those scales, you can take each of the notes and make chords out of just those notes, and all the chords will work nicely with each other. You've also got modes, which are just spicy scales. They each vary in tone, Lydian being really bright and happy, and Locrian being super dark and depressing. This video by David Bennett Piano again talks about the brightness of each mode. Why am I telling you all this? Knowing the tone of each scale is important for songwriting, and I really recommend you learn the differences. either through experimenting yourself or just listening. I'll use it myself. For example, my song What I Thought I Got, I felt like making some hyperpop all of a sudden where it's all very bright and happy and shit. So I thought, right, I'm gonna make this in Lydian because I know that's the really happy fucking scale, and you can hear it. It's really bright and pretty. So learn your modes if you want to make a specific mood in a song. FL Studio has a scale highlighting tool which just highlights all of the notes in a scale, but it's not just the modes and the major and minor scale. You've also got all these other scales which I haven't heard of before, like Prometheus. Don't know what that one sounds like. And fucking Neapolitan. Thought that shit was from Transformers. Sometimes I feel that just focusing on the scale feels very restricting. So sometimes you should look away from the scale and focus more on what chord you're playing. Because one way or another, every note in a chord that you play is in several different scales. So you can make your shit sound even more interesting by swapping between these scales. This is known as modulation. Modulation helps your music sound more interesting without having to do much work. Be careful when modulating though, because sometimes it's better to create tension, a slow build up before you change key completely. But, on the other hand, you can also just change key right off the bat completely unexpectedly and make shit sound really weird. This video by David Bennett Piano, again, shout that guy, he's going to be popping up a lot in this music theory section, goes over different ways of doing key changes. There's also this video by Music Matters about modulation, voice leading. Now that I've gone over chords and scales, it's important that you figure out what voice leading is, which just means how you deliver a chord progression. All notes in a progression follow a motion or direction, and if you've got no motion, then you've got no devotion to making good music. That bit when I was talking about melodies and I was talking about not jumping in pitch or it loses memorability, that's because of voice leading. If it doesn't follow a clear direction, then it lacks emotion. Voice leading is how you get the emotion out of a chord progression. This video by Signals Music explains voice leading. In the examples he gives, you can really hear how the emotion comes out in voice leading, so give it a watch. Cadences. Cadences also are a part of that whole direction thing. It's a special word for the directions in which chords can tense and resolve. The diatonic chords in a scale are usually grouped into 7 numbers, one being the beginning or root of the scale. The one chord feels the most at peace and doesn't need to resolve anywhere, usually used to start or end a chord progression just so the listener knows the key center is. But you can fuck about with the starting chord. It doesn't always need to be the one, just so that you can mess with the listener. Fuck you for listening to my music. I'm not gonna give you anything clear at all, you bastard. The one chord is also known as the tonic. This will be important later. Then you've got the 5th chord, which is the dominant chord. This is called the dominant chord because a lot of the chords that aren't the 1 or the 5 want to resolve to either the 5 or the 1. Since the 5 note of the scale and the 5 chord of the scale is just the 5th of the 1st chord, it really wants to resolve down to the 1. So you've got this cadence called the perfect cadence, where it's the 5-1 cadence. It resolves perfectly and is really good for if you want to end a chord progression. The 2nd chord of a scale usually wants to resolve to the tonic, told you it'd come back. The 3rd chord wants to resolve to the 5th or the 1. The 4th chord wants to resolve to the dominant. The 6th chord also wants to resolve to the dominant. And the 7th also usually wants to resolve to the tonic. Some resolves work better than others. It's easier just to experiment with it. The ones I mentioned are just the main ones that you can use, but it's really up to you. Some other cadences are plagal, which is the 4th chord, and the tonic, like the perfect cadence, but feels a bit different. Imperfect, that's 5 to 6, more like a surprise to a different chord and less of a resolve. Used more if you want to change key or go somewhere else with the song.
Hello listeners, I just wanted to apologise because I fed you false information. I'm very angry and upset at myself because it could have been very avoidable, but I've just been lying to myself the entire time. An imperfect cadence isn't the 5 to the 6. The 5 to the 6 is known as the interrupted cadence, which I just completely forget to mention for some reason. And the imperfect cadence is any diatonic chord, which is just the chords from the scale, resolving to the 5. People like that one because it also has the same value of surprise, not really tension and release. It's more of a release, but a bit of a weird one, you know. It just makes shit sound interesting. Once again, I am very sorry. I hate myself. You hate me. It's all good. All worked out in the end, didn't it? Back to the video.
This video by Music Matters, shout him. I also mention him quite a bit. Also goes into cadences and some of the ones that I've mentioned and how you can make a chord progression, so give that one a watch. Another way you can switch up your chord progressions, make them sound cool, is the tritone substitution. You get the perfect cadence that I mentioned, which is the 5-1 cadence, and you substitute the 5 chord for that chord's tritone. A way you can remember it is just count down 6 semitones on the piano roll, and then just make a chord out of that one and delete the 5 chord. The tritone is a really tense chord and really needs to resolve, so it makes it feel even specialer when you resolve it to the 1. Another useful chord progression substitution is the secondary dominant. You take a chord progression and you take a chord, you go to that chord's own relative key, so if it's G major, you go to the G major key, and you find the 5th of that key, which I think is D something. You play that chord just before you play that G major, and then it has its own little special resolution there, which sounds pretty cool and interesting if you want to do a little surprise resolution. And of course you have to use these techniques in your melodies as well, just to make your melodies sound even cooler. Circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is one of the ways we make relationships between chords make sense. Every chord you play in the circle of fifths sounds nice with each other, so that's why every time you hear someone mention it, it's always about how, oh, it's just the most important thing in music theory. But the thing is, it gets kind of tricky to remember all the fucking notes because there's a major and minor equivalent, and it just becomes a massive hassle to remember. So you don't really have to commit the circle to memory. Strip it back a bit and look at the chord you play. Pick any chord. That chord has a 5th. All you have to do is just separate that 5th and then play that 5th as its own chord. If you want to play in the minor motherfucking version of the circle of fifths, play a minor version. If you want to play the major version, play a major version. It's really that easy. But I can see why people say you should memorize it, because then it's a lot quicker. You could just bring a picture up on your phone and be like, right, what's the next note I want to go to? Because, you know, it does get a bit boring jumping in like a specific way down the circle of fifths or up the circle of fifths. You know, sometimes it's nice to jump spots, so places that aren't like too closely apart. So it does become long if you do my way, but you know, my way is a lot easier than having to remember a bunch of shit. There's also the circle of thirds and circle of fourths. They're like the circle of fifths, but they ascend in thirds and fourths. Thirds being major or minor thirds, and fourths being fourths. This video here by Brad Harrison Piano explains them a lot better than I do, so check it out. Is there a circle of seconds out there? Apparently there is. It's known as the whole tone scale. The circle of firsts would just be the chromatic scale, every note on the keyboard. But there's a circle of seconds out there as well. Nobody talks about that one. there's at least 3 different fucking scales and circles nobody is talking about. Probably because they sound horrible when people tried experimenting with them, so they don't bother. The pentatonic scale. The pentatonic scale is like the circle of fifths, where all the notes within the scale sound nice with each other. Also, penta means 5, so there's a relation there with the 5 notes. Also, the blues scale, which is used in a lot of blues music, is just the pentatonic scale with an extra note at the end that makes it sound very bluesy. The pentatonic scale is really good for when you're soloing. So if you've got a guitar track you want to shred, just scale highlight the pentatonic scale and go crazy with it. Or just any instrument that you want to solo. The problem with my solos are the times that I've done them, they all stink. A lot of them just sound horrible and I wish they never happened, but it's more proof out there that I'm not an industry plant because I've got a history of shit music. Didn't just appear out of nowhere, did I? Counterpoint. Counterpoint is a pretty fun piece of music theory. It's where you've got one little melody going on, you've got another melody, or it can just be the whole song. Each part having its own little sense of rhythm to it going on, and you bring all of that rhythm together, and it all sounds like it's moving in one great big harmony. So you should definitely consider using counterpoint if you think your rhythm stinks. There are different types of counterpoint, 1-to-1 being the main type, where the different harmonies move in the same direction as each other, but you can also move them in the opposite direction. There's several different types. This video by Music Matters explains the different types of counterpoint, and you can really hear it. It's really cool. Check it out. Call and response. Call and response is also pretty cool. It's when you have a phrase or a melody, and then you repeat that same rhythm, but on a different instrument, or you can change the rhythm up a little bit. It's really fun. Include it. It creates a little bit of tension and resolution, like how I'm doing with these long-ass motherfucking pauses. Arpeggios. An arpeggio is when you play the notes but you separate them from each other rhythmically, so there's a delay to them. There's different ways of delivering an arpeggio, either starting at the fifth or the root, or making it go up and down in a following regular continuous motion. You can play them on any instrument, but you typically hear them on a guitar or an electric piano. Ostinato. Ostinatos are pretty cool. They're just one phrase being repeated several times. Works well as a texture, not really as a melody, since it's very repetitive, and it's nice to change it slightly after a few bars. Syncopation, but with your melodies. Syncopating your melodies just a tiny bit can also make your melodies sound just that much better. Using silence is also a good way of creating tension, especially with your drums. Cutting them out, quarter note, and then bringing them back in helps emphasize certain parts and makes them slightly uneasy. Orchestration. Making your music sound slightly orchestrated is time consuming, but the effort's worth it. This video explains all the different sections of an orchestra, but you don't have to limit yourself just to orchestral equipment like tubas and shit. You can use whatever you want and just duplicate that a bunch of times, but have the octaves different and the notes different, and that's a type of orchestration. Of course you have to layer the instruments though, don't do it all on one fucking instrument, you criminal. Yeah, it's the easy way out, and it's not as long and time consuming as cloning the tracks, but it's not the same. I'll go into why it's not the same, but this video is long enough as it is. Sampling. You know it, you love it. Everyone loves it except record labels, but no one likes them. There's 2 kinds of sample chopping that I know of, rhythmic and melodic. Rhythmic is taking a sample and turning it into a pattern. This can be substituting the samples for drum kits, or creating your own little rhythms and making the sample separate to the drums and making it like a little percussion or whatever, you know, just making it really rhythmic and percussive. And then there's melodic, which is taking a sample that's got some kind of melodic element to it and chopping it up and making it into a different melody. I've never attempted making a melodic sample chop because I'm not that good. But I am a drummer, so rhythmic chopping is easy. Yeah, if you know how to play an instrument, this whole music dealie becomes just slightly more easier. But if you don't, catch up fellas, I guess. This video by NaviD goes into more details on sample chopping. There's also this video by Will Hatton you can also check out. Reference track. Reference tracks are just songs that you use as inspiration for whatever part of music you're making. It could either be the mixing, it could be the production, it can be anything. Reference tracks are really useful if you make type beats as well. You can use the reference track and match it with what you've got to see if it sounds like the inspiration. Crescendos. Crescendos are when you get something quiet and you make it loud. Really works with emphasizing transitions. You may also know them as risers or cymbals. They also do the trick quite well when you slowly increase the velocity on a cymbal. Very cool. You can do the same with synth pads as well, or reverse swells. There's also reverse reverb. There's lots of different ways you can create crescendos.
Welcome to Clues, the show where you send me questions about music and I do my best to answer them.
We've got a little letter here from Oscar in Can't But Maybe Later Bury that says, Dear Mr. Jimmy... Seem to have read the wrong letter there. Dear Mr. Pence, did you know that sustaining a note and giving it legato helps give out a lot of emotion? So if your chords are a bit too much, cut them out and sustain some of them by pressing Control L. Yes, I did already know that this is a question show. You meant to send any fucking questions. Next question from Oscar from the Royal Borough of Kensington upon Tyne, leading to Chesterton World of Adventures upon Legoland, says, Dear Mr. 25, silence can be a good way of creating tension in your track. So cutting out bits. I already know this. I've already said this in this video. These aren't helpful questions. I'm not, no, fuck's sake. And that was Clues, brought to you by Chanel 4.
Hello, this is post-production me talking. I know this video is coming out late and I've reached way over 25 subscribers now. Thank you, by the way. This video is a long one and it's taken me forever to edit and record, so thank you for waiting. Anyway, I'm adding this bit in because I found out this information quite recently. I saw this video by Adam Neely on music theory and racism, and I thought I'd like to add my own perspective on the topic. That's right, I'm going to be talking about racism in a stupid video on music to show that I know music and I'm smart. Yippee! In this video, he covers how, on an academic level, studying music theory has got a very Eurocentric, white male viewpoint, only really covering music notation and theory of hundreds of years ago, not really including any of the other hundreds of years of development that's been going on within music theory. Bearing in mind that video is 4 years old as of this recording, so maybe studying music theory has gotten better at American universities. I didn't study music at school, so I don't have a GCSE or equivalent in music theory, so I can't speak for UK schools when they teach music theory because I haven't been taught music theory at UK schools. So I can't say there's a difference or there's a similarity in the way they teach with America and the UK. But the way that I did learn music theory was online. And no, this isn't going to be an ad for Berkeley Online. Never used it, don't even know any of the stuff that they cover. I learned music theory through lots of different videos on YouTube, and in those videos, they weren't really discriminatory to one specific person or century. For example, David Bennett Piano, I've mentioned him a bunch already. He made a video on different musical rhythms, which was a video I used as inspiration for when I created my rhythms album. Shout out him. He covered many different cultures and people, so I don't really, you know, I haven't really had a discriminatory, like, learning experience. He also made a few videos on the Beatles. Now, if you couldn't tell through my Beatles-esque attire, I am a big Beatles fan. And he made a video where he talked about how the Beatles were inspired by a lot of Indian music theory in some of their musics. So, in some of their music, very progressive. Well done. Which inspired me to look up more bits on Indian music theory. This doing that, it made me discover this video by Umri Bhattu and Anuja K, who made a playlist of videos on Indian music theory, which inspired me to make my most psychedelic song. I don't like that song because it's very dissonant, and I wish I did a better job at making it. So I did a while after releasing that one, taking inspiration from music theory. It's less dissonant and it actually sounds good in my opinion. And I used the Indian music theory a lot better. Now, with the internet, there are many different creators out there, all with different cultures and genres of music theory, and they all have an equal chance, depending on if they have access to the internet or not, to upload their knowledge on music theory. So my experience of learning wasn't as white supremacist-y as some other people might have experienced. I can't speak for the whole, but that's my experience of it at least. Side note, all the comments telling me to learn music theory can just right off. I've been getting them since I first started posting beats through short form content, and fair enough, most of my music stunk. I did know music theory though. I knew it then. I didn't know it as much as I did now, or how to implement it then, but I still knew a little bit of it. And now, after all, I'm not perfect. I still couldn't, make absolute bangers. I still do get the occasional music theory comment though, to this day. And I know all this music theory. I've been making this motherfucking video talking about music theory, right? I know it. Please stop commenting it. Now, once this video releases, there will be evidence of me knowing music theory. So if you don't like the way my music sounds and you still comment, learn music theory, you're boring. That'll tell them. Moving on. Part 3. Sound design. Sound design is fun when you know what you're doing. There's a lot of technical science shit behind it, so it's gonna feel boring, but the best thing you can do is implement it and experiment. There's lots of different kinds of sound design. It can be taking real life sounds that you've recorded and then editing them later, or just messing around with synthesizers, which is the one I do in a lot of my music. The main one I'm going to cover is FM synthesis, or frequency modulation synthesis. In my opinion, it's the most easy kind of sound design I know of, and to show you, I'm going to use a stock FL plugin called GMF. Thanks, Mississippi. I'll also link to videos that do a better job at explaining, in case my explanation stinks. FM synthesis uses wave shapes, or oscillators, to make noise, but then you can graft on other oscillators onto each other to affect the way it sounds to make even more weird noise. To get a blank synth on GMS, which you can change to however you want, first you're going to have to go onto presets, user, and then click default, and that'll open up a default preset. Now you can feel free to change whatever you want in any way you want. Here we go. First, you're gonna want to look over here. This is your amplification envelope, which basically changes the way the sound comes out. Attack changes the time it takes for the sound to reach full volume, so it gives it a bit of a rise effect. Very nice. If you want to make a pad, I would increase the length of the attack, and then that'll give it a really nice pad, slow rise, little fucking crescendo type dealy. Then you've got decay. Decay affects how long it takes for the sound to die down to 0. Quick decays are good for plucks. Sustain affects how long a note plays for. Changing the sustain is also pretty good for pads, you know, if you like increase the attack and lower the sustain, and then you can increase the release, which I'll mention in a minute. It has a very nice long reverby kind of sound to it. Also gonna explain reverb later. Release is how long the synth rings out for after it's finished playing something. Now we can look at the filter and the filter envelope. Right now with the default preset, it sounds a bit harsh with all the buzzing, so we can put the filter on it, which filters out some of the frequencies. Clever. Low pass cuts out all the high frequencies. High pass cuts out all the low frequencies. Resonance gives the filter a bit of a peak just before where the cutoff line is, so it's a bit louder. Now I can cut that sound to get a lot of a nicer, less harsh tone from the synth. But now that you've made it all nice and soft, it's not got a punch to it anymore, so you can put an envelope onto the filter. It works the same way as the amplification envelope in the way it controls the length of time it takes to activate. So experiment with it, make some cool shit. On this specific plugin though, it's only got attack, decay, and amount. Attack already covered how long it takes to activate, decay, how long it goes to 0, and amount, you're not going to believe it, controls the amount. Now you've got the oscillators themselves. These are the shapes at which the sound vibrates. The ones it's on now is saw, which looks like this, and they sound like this. There's a bunch of different presets on different synths for different kinds of oscillator shapes. So sometimes you can get completely unique shapes just to those specific plugins. But here are some of the universal ones that almost every oscillator FM synth should have. Triangle, square, sine, saw, and white noise. All have their own unique textures. This video on how to make digicore goes into details of how they sound. On this plugin you can use 3 oscillators at a time, including white noise. The top one being the main oscillator. Over here you can control the mix level of the other oscillators so it can sound even more unique. In sound design, you can control how much you want the oscillator to phase in with the main oscillator, which means the other oscillator combines with the main one, which is a lot like when you're combined there around my. You can also turn on re-trigger, which just means it'll activate again whenever a note is played. Then you've got detune, which controls how much each oscillator goes out of tune with each other, so it has a bit more of a harmony to it. Sounds pretty cool, but too much makes it sound unison controls how much you want the oscillators to generate the same pitch as each other, making it sound more rich harmonically. You've got the stereo width and the octave. Stereo controls how far apart you want the synth to sound in your headphones, and octave controls how high or low an octave you want the synth to play at. You can just move the notes up or down an octave yourself, but what do I know? I've only been doing this for 11 months. One more thing before we move on to effects, and that's mono voice. Mono voice just makes it so that it can only play one note at a time. So if you make a chord on a mono voice synth, it doesn't make any noise because it only plays one note at a time. It's really good for leads. Right, moving over to this area here, LFO. It controls the things like the filter and the pitch, but very secretly because it's shy. You can do a bunch of different cool shit on synths just using the LFO. Like if you want it to have vibrato, you can just add a little bit of pitch LFO to it. It gets all wobbly. If you want to tremolo, you can use the LFO to control the volume. If you want your family to respect your life choices, the LFO can't do anything about that, so you're just gonna have to accept it. Then you can go over to this corner over here, which is the effects corner, which puts effects onto your synthesizer. I'll talk more on different types of audio effects later, but what you need to know about them now is they basically make the sounds change depending on the effect. They can also be controlled by an LFO if you're feeling adventurous. You've also got a glide function. The button activates the wheel, and the wheel controls how much you want your synth to glide from one note to another. A lot of old West Coast hip-hop use the glide feature a lot on their synthesizers. You know, you got NWA with Dope Man, the Chronic, Nothing But a G thing. That's nice little high-pitch synth that uses the glide, and I think it's really cool. I use it in a lot of my music. That's just one synth plugin though. There are loads of other synth plugins with their own little tweaks and features that you can buy, or you can fucking pirate, or you can get for free. Really, it's up to you. Experiment. It's really fun. Part 4, mixing and mastering. Right, we're almost at the end now. It's the final process of a song that usually happens at the end, but you can mix a song whenever you want. In the middle of it, at the end, it doesn't matter. A lot of what I say is going to be my opinion. You don't really have to care if you don't agree. I think mixing shouldn't really be stressed over too much. Most people don't even notice the things that you're mixing because not everyone knows about mixing. However, there is limits to what you can get away with. There is no one set way of mixing. It's all very subjective. This is just a brief overview of things you can do. One of the things that you should prioritize in mixing is volume. If a person can't hear it, then they're missing out on the good stuff. And if it's too loud, then they're not going to be able to enjoy it because it's hurting their ears. Unless if they like it like that for some reason. A phrase you'll probably hear a lot is clipping. Whenever a noise goes over 0 decibels. When you listen back to clipping audio, a lot of the time it sounds distorted. Worst case scenario, it can also damage your speakers, so beware. So you have to walk a fine line between loud and quiet. There's different ways of making shit loud and quiet so you can just get it right. One of the things you can do to get volume control down is EQ. EQ is where it shows you all the frequencies that are being played from an audio source, and you can choose to highlight and cut out certain frequencies. So if a kick is a bit weak, you can cut out the high frequencies and raise the low frequencies, so then it has a bit more of a thud. This brings in the sound design thing from earlier, where high pass cuts out low frequencies and low pass cuts out high frequencies.
Welcome to the 25p mixing experience, brought to you by Chanel 4. Hello, welcome to the only show on TV in the world that answers questions about mixing and music production. I'm the first to do it. Nobody else has done this before. Right, the first question we have is from Oscar in Uxbridge. In EQ, you can cut the high and low in the melody so you can raise very specific frequencies to find harsh frequencies that are unwanted and cut them out. by fucking making them really specific. It's funny you should mention unwanted frequencies, because you're unwanted by your parents. I'm not doing this anymore. The rest of this is just fucking people telling me shit and not asking me questions. This is meant to be question show. Right, yeah, no, fuck this, Mr. Tumble bollocks. I'm going home. Thanks for watching 25p's mixing experience. Cancelled by Chanel 4.
The second thing you can do is use a compressor. A compressor controls the dynamic range of a sound. There is a 10-hour-long video out there that you can watch of your own free will that covers almost every detail of compression, I assume. I haven't watched the video, I just know it exists. Here's my overview of it, in case you can't be asked to sit through 10 hours, which, I mean, come on, why wouldn't you? Say you've got a sound that's too loud at a lot of points, and you want to make it quieter, but only at those specific points. A compressor turns the volume down of that specific thing at those points, without you having to pay it a living wage. It does it all for free. You've got the threshold. The threshold covers where you want the compressor to activate. Ratio controls how much you want the compressor to work. High ratios cutting out lots of dynamics, low ratios cutting out only a little bit. Attack, just like in sound design, tells the compressor how long you want it to take before it activates, so it can have a bit of a curve before it cuts off, or it can just completely cut off the frequency. And gain is how much you want to bring back the volume that you lost from the compressor. On the stock FL compressor, you've got a type as well. I don't know what that means, and I can't be asked to Google it. Probably something to do with the way that it works. But on some other compressor plugins, like the ones on Logic, you can have a knee as well, which just controls the angle of how much you want it to cut off. If it's really high, then it's got a really sharp angle and it cuts off a lot of transients and dynamics. And if it's low, then it's got less of a sharp angle and it does less of a sharp cut off. Then you've got multiband compressor. It's the same as a regular compressor, but it can control different frequencies. So you can compress the highs a specific amount, the mids a specific amount, and the lows specific amount. Really good for drums. Limiter and noise gate. Both of these do similar things. A limiter acts like a compressor where it brings down the volume past a certain level, but it caps it at that level, so it doesn't allow any dynamics past that point. And a noise gate gets rid of background sounds at a specific level. You've got a transient processor, which just shapes the way a sound comes out. Fruity Soft Clipper is specific to FL, but there are a few emulation plugins. It acts like a limiter, but it caps the volume at a certain level, but it doesn't cut off the noise completely. It smooths the volume out, so it's not completely gone and sounds a little bit nicer. Another FL-specific plugin is Maximus. It's like the multiband compressor, but it brings the volumes up to a loud enough level, and it's really good for if you want to master a beat, which just means make it loud enough for every fucking type of listening, speakers, headphones, etc. Finally, Sound Goodizer. It works as an EQ, compressor, and saturation knob. What is saturation? It's complicated. Every frequency has got quieter other frequencies which can't be heard by the human ear. Saturation raises some of those frequencies, called harmonics, making it sound louder when really it's just making it more harmonically rich. It's also known as an exciter, which you can find on Logic Pro or just look up saturation knob plugin. It's really useful for vocals and stuff. It makes it sound really nice and crispy. Those are all of the dynamic effects you can add. They all control the shape of the volume in one way or another. So make sure you try to implement at least some of them in your mixes. Moving on to panning and stereo width. Like I mentioned in sound design, Stereo is where there's two speakers, one left, one right. You've got headphones, they both work in stereo, same with speakers, just anything that's got two output sources. Whereas something like your phone speaker only works in mono, which means it only comes out of one speaker. You can separate the different channels of the song, all the different instruments and stuff that you've got recorded or MIDI, into different areas of the stereo field. So some sounds will sound louder depending on where you move them, and if you're listening to it in one ear or the other ear. There's also effects that control the stereo field. You've got stereo shapers and stereo imagers. They just move the panning of a channel in different ways, making it sound interesting without losing clarity. You can use panning when you've got lots of stuff going on, and if it's all in the center, then you're not going to be able to tell what's going on, so you can spread them out so you can hear stuff more in one ear and stuff in the other ear, and it all works together. There are some rules to what instruments you pan in which direction. Like really low-end instruments like 808s, kicks, and basses are usually kept in the center. Why? The real answer is boring, so I'm making up my own answer. Choose one of the following. If you think none of them are funny, you can pick option E, which is go fuck yourself. I've said which means way too many times in this video. There are some help sheets scattered around the internet of different ways you can pan and EQ instruments. It's really down to your own personal preference. Once again, reference tracks can be pretty helpful, especially with mixing, when you want to pay attention to all the different mixing stuff that goes on. Even just regularly listening to shit as a producer, and like you start to notice all the different like effects and mixing stuff that they do, and I think it's pretty cool. Then there's all these other audio effects which I'll go into in no particular order. You've got distortion, it makes the sound like it's being played through broken equipment. Chorus shifts the pitches of some of the noises out of phase, making it sound more like there's more than one pitch going on. Flanger mixes two signals together by delaying one of them. Delay makes a signal not play on time, but also gives an echo sound. Reverb puts a sound in a different place, like a hall or a small room. Phaser moves the phase of a signal in and out. Tremolo makes the volume quiet in one ear and raises it in the other ear, and vice versa. Vibrato moves the pitch up and down over a set amount of time, same with tremolo but for pitch. Bit crusher compresses the audio quality so it sounds more like a retro game. Auto-tune or pitch correction makes sure the thing is sung in key. Pitch shifter changes the pitch to whatever you choose. And finally, looks at a voice and then changes it to whatever you want by modulating it. There are lots of different effects. Some you buy, some come with the DAW. Then there's MIDI. MIDI is a virtual replication of an instrument. Some of them are more good than others. Some of them stink. Don't use Logic guitars, they fucking suck. All of them. No matter what you do, fucking horrible.
Here's how I add MIDI in FL. There's a different way, but this is how I do it. You look over here, this is your plugin database. It shows you all the different plugins. You just pick the one that you want, drag it over into the track thing over there, and it should open up. If you want to change the way it works, you can just double click on the plugin where you put it in the track list. I prefer it this way because you can see everything that goes on in the window. You don't have to piss about with patterns and shit. FL really uses patterns a lot. It's all grid based, so that's why there's a pattern and a song option. One is for the playhead to play the whole song, and one is just to play the pattern. So you can just switch between the two by pressing L on the keyboard, and that switches between pattern and song.
Now this is the part where I explain all of the different dials and shit that you can find on these effects. Here we go. Reverb. Again, going back to the whole EQ thing with high and low cut. It cuts out the highs, it cuts out the lows of the reverb, so that way it's less harsh. Decay controls how long it takes for it to completely go away and stop bouncing off of the walls or whatever. Size controls how big you want the room you're putting it into to be. Dry and wet acts as a mix dial. The more dry it is, the less reverb you can hear. The more wet it is, the more reverb you can hear. Arr, 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 arr. Very funny. Delay or pre-delay just delays the reverb, so it activates a little bit later on. Moving on, we've got delay. A lot of delays are slightly different from each other. They all usually share a dry, a wet, and a feedback. Same as reverb. Dry and wet just control the mix, how much you want it to work, how much you don't want it to work. And feedback is just how crazy do you want it to sound. Phaser shifts the signal in and out of phase, but depth just controls how far you want it to go out of phase, and feedback is how weird it sounds. It also kind of differs from what plugin you use. Sometimes they include different stuff, but it usually consists of a depth and a feedback. Flanger, same thing with dry and wet. It includes a speed and a depth, how fast you want it to work, how much you want it to work. It also usually has a delay and a stereo spreader,
I realised I didn't cover chorus. Chorus usually has a rate and a depth, how much you want it to work and how fast you want it to work. I really mostly just use the presets. You don't really need to know what everything means. You can Google the stuff I didn't mention. Like, you can just use the presets to save yourself time. But if, you're really fiddly with it, then learn what all the dials mean and shit.
The next thing I want to talk about is buses, aka bussing. Yeah, I know, sex lol. A bus is when you send a piece of audio that's in one channel to another channel. Why would you want to do that? So you can put effects on that channel you're sending it to. It's a way of having one universal effect that you can apply to lots of different channels at the same time, so then it saves you time having to put that effect onto each and every audio channel. You can also choose how much you want the bus to work, so if there's too much effect on one channel, you can lower the amount that it's sending to the bus, so that way there's less of that effect going on. The next thing I want to cover is sidechaining. It's when you make one instrument quieter when another instrument's playing. It's nice for when you've got a lot going on and you want to make certain things quiet that can't be heard when another thing is playing.
Okay, so sidechaining is a bit of a bastard to do in FL. You right click where you add a bus, and then you click sidechain to this track only. Then you open Fruity Limiter, and then change comp or compression, and then change the sidechain number to 1. You can right click it and choose which instrument you're sidechaining it to. Then you can adjust the ratio, the threshold, and the knee of how it works, and you can also add an envelope to it if you want.
Final mixing thing I want to cover is automation. Automation is just when you make something happen over time. You can automate volume and do fade-ins and fade-outs. You can automate the mix of effects, so you can control how much you want effect to work over time. It really works with anything. In FL, you just right-click something and then you'd find Create Automation Clip, and it's there. It's different with different EAWs, you just have to figure it out.
Here's how you set up an audio recording in FL. It's a bit of a bitch as well. You go over into the mixer channel and there's a little thing up there that says input. You choose the input and then it activates the channel that you're inputting it to. You're going to want to turn it off just because it opens some feedback. Then you want to go to options, audio settings, click on the little ASIO thing, and then choose your input. And then it's ready to record, and it'll create a little audio form thing right there. You can then edit it by double clicking on it, and there's a bunch of little thingies there like pitch and time and reverse and shit.
Dear David Bennett Piano, I wrote you but you still ain't calling. I left my YouTube, SoundCloud and Instagram at the bottom. Anyway, is your last name really Piano? Right, we have now come to the conclusion. I hope that my collection of knowledge at least helped someone. I probably missed some stuff. You can let me know if I missed anything in the comments, and I won't read them.
In all seriousness though, thank you for getting me to over 25 subscribers now. It has been quite a journey. And now, your hosts for this evening, the Rolling Stones.